On August 23rd, 2011, I will be releasing the Source Field Investigations with Penguin. This is a brand new book that has summarized 30 years worth of research into some of the most amazing and astonishing information that I've ever seen in my life. This is also the inauguration of our Boston Convergence Conference, where we're all gathered here for the whole weekend. So the video that people are going to see online, that's only going to be the first half an hour of a 16-hour talk. So what I'm doing here is just summarizing what we get at the beginning so that you're going to see an overview of this whole thing. The book starts out with a very interesting discussion about hypnosis, and we're going to get into that in just a minute. Hypnosis being the idea that we're walking around in some sort of trance, and I will explain what I mean by that. The trance that we're walking around in is what we call reality, because ultimately the idea of the source field is a very unique concept. It's the idea that space, time, matter, energy, biology is all being created by a universal consciousness. And that universal consciousness appears to have loving energy as its main attribute, as its main descriptor that we could use. So I propose that if this is the essence of the universe, if the universe is conscious, and everything in the universe is consciousness, then somehow the part of us that is the conscious mind must be only a small portion of what consciousness really is. And therefore, somehow we have been shielded from the truth. We've been shielded from the reality of who and what we really are. And so in a sense, it's as if we're walking around in a trance, a hypnotic trance. Now, of course, the classic hypnotist would swing a watch back and forth in order to induce hypnotic trance. But in the 1960s, they had it pretty much figured out. If you want to get somebody in a trance, let's say you're a guy and you're trying to hook up with a woman, you're trying to have sex, you use a cigar. It's a classic method. You smoke the cigar and you blow the smoke right in her face. And as it says here, blow in her face and she'll follow you anywhere. More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. And Santa Claus at some point graduated from pipe smoking up to cigarettes. So the next time it's Christmas morning and the kids are like, "Mommy, Daddy, what's that smell?" "Oh, that's just Santa Claus. He's puffing away while he's filling up your chimney. Don't worry about it. Filling up your stocking. No big deal. It's just Santa." So let's face it, you could get hit by a bus tomorrow, so go on, have a fag. That's what they used to call it, honestly, These advertisements that I showed you are advertisements that are intended to manipulate public opinion. They're actually hypnotic inductions. We have been given so many programs to think a certain way, to feel a certain way, to behave a certain way, and the advertisements just drill that into our head over and over again. And those advertisements are but a subset of a much greater hypnosis that is what we would consider common thinking. What do people think reality is? What's commonly accepted? What's considered common knowledge? Some people seem to be able to have telepathy, even telekinesis, very unusual, profound abilities. And the question keeps coming up, why do some people have this ability and others do not? And what is the source field? How do we access it? So over the course of this weekend, we're going to be answering that. And I touch on those questions in the book as well. One of the first real exposures that the mainstream had to hypnosis was the work of Dr. Cleve Baxter. Now, Dr. Cleve Baxter actually was working for the military and researching hypnosis on the side. And in the course of his research into hypnotic trance states, he actually took a very aggressive move. He hypnotized the secretary of the commanding general of the Counterintelligence Corps. in December 1947. Now imagine this. He walks into her office. There were very few books to read on hypnosis back then. So he had just read everything he could on the subject. He'd already had success with this in college, but then he went on after college to go into the military as a result of Pearl Harbor. So as a result of his interest in hypnosis and having seen it work before, many times before, he actually got this secretary to take a highly classified document out of a folder and give it to him while she was under hypnosis. And then she comes out of hypnosis after he'd hidden the document away. And she had absolutely no memory of having taken the document. And she knew that he'd hypnotized him, but he had told her under hypnosis, "You will not be able to remember giving me this document at all." And there's some part of our mind that just obeys the command. If you're given a command while you're under hypnosis, this part of you just very blindly obeys. So obviously he was afraid that he could get a court-martial for this, but he wanted to impress upon the military the importance of hypnosis in terms of how it could be used for intelligence purposes, including extracting information from personnel without their knowledge. Well, a letter came through very shortly after he submitted this whole experiment to the general, and the general estimated that this was of high value to military intelligence. A lot of stuff that happened with the CIA got started with Cleve Baxter. He was also the one who pioneered the methods for detecting polygraph in terms of how the skin electrical activity varies depending on whether you're telling the truth or telling a lie. Baxter found out that people who were lying would have a much higher amount of electrical activity on their skin. That was the basis of the polygraph. This brings us next to Harold Sherman. Now, he wrote a book called How to Make ESP Work for You. And that was in the late 1960s, and it was a very, very important book in my development. It was the first book I read when I was 7 years old, and I began practicing the exercises. So I was 37, just turned 38 when I finished source field investigation, so that's why I say that it literally was 30 years worth of research. Because one of the quotes that's in the book comes from this book I read by Harold Sherman when I was 7 years old. And he describes using hypnosis in a very, very unique way that we might not have realized. He's talking about a famous hypnotist named Dr. Thomas Garrett, who hypnotized the son of a famous playwright from Broadway. So this was a mainstream kid who was a high-profile person because of his father. He had a falling out with a fiancée who was going to a sorority at Wellesley College. They were going to get married. Something bad happened between them, and he thought that it was all over for good. He was really distraught about this, so he went to Dr. Thomas Garrett seeking hypnotherapy, seeking some sort of treatment for this. Now, here's the strange thing. Dr. Thomas Garrett had experience with hypnotizing people and telling them that under hypnosis they can fly, they can go anywhere they want, they can walk through walls, and it's no big deal. It's just a natural ability that we all have, as if when you're hypnotized, you're automatically having an out-of-body experience, having an astral projection. So this son of the Broadway playwright was instructed to go to the sorority building while he was hypnotized to visit his fiancée. And sure enough, he was able to go there. He was told that he could fly right through her door. And in fact, he did go right through the door. He then found her at her desk, and she was actually writing him a letter, hoping that they would be able to get back together and reconcile their engagement. He was so excited about this that it almost knocked him out of hypnosis. But Dr. Garrett was able to keep him calm enough so that he could look over her shoulder and read the letter that she was writing. So he dictated the letter word by word, and Dr. Thomas Garrett wrote down every single word that he said, exactly what the letter was. So the session finishes. He said, wow, wouldn't that be nice if that was true? It was pretty cool, because he was instructed to remember everything that happened in a post-hypnotic suggestion. Well, the next day, he gets a special delivery telegram. And the telegram is the exact same letter from his fiancée sent to him. And Dr. Thomas Garrett in his file had her letter and his original handwritten notes, and they were only off by a couple words. So he was literally able to read the letter that she wrote, word for word, dictated out loud. Thomas Garrett wrote it down. Now, this was done in like the 1930s. And so it seems that there is a deliberate suppression in place to keep this information from us. Here's another very fascinating piece of information. A remote viewing experiment that was done in China. Now, of course, remote viewing is the next logical extension of what I've just told you. Remote viewing would be taking that principle where you could have an out-of-body experience, go somewhere else, see something that's worthwhile information, and bring it back. They then, in the military, standardized this process to get it to the point where you could do it by yourself while you're conscious, so that part of your mind is awake, part of your mind is asleep, and you're able to fly around and actually see these things out there in the world. Now, the Chinese were studying extra high functioning, or what they called EHF psychics, in a laboratory. And in this one particular remote viewing experiment, they were looking at a Chinese character, a complex Chinese character, while they were being under the influence of the remote viewing. They went to this one room where the character was, and they had to read which character it was. They didn't even know what it was going to be. They didn't know if it was going to be a character or anything else. But here's the trick. The Chinese character was located in a room that was completely dark. There was no way that light could get into this room. But they had light sensors in the room. And what they found was that during the times that they accurately saw the target, they actually could read the Chinese character and figure out which one it was, surges of up to 15,000 photons showed up in that room. So now think about Thomas Garrett and the son of the Broadway playwright. And here's this guy floating into the sorority and seeing his girlfriend write the letter. He dictates the letter, it's 100% correct. The Chinese proved that there is actually a measurable energy that we give off when we are going out of body and going to these places. So that's a fascinating discovery, because what it reveals is that this astral body is not some fantasy. It's a real energetic presence that actually is giving off photons of light, measurable photons. So another very interesting thing with hypnosis is the idea of a post-hypnotic suggestion. Cleve Baxter, who I showed you before, would use post-hypnotic suggestion in front of large audiences. Specifically, what he would do in many cases is tell someone who was under hypnosis, when you come out of hypnosis, you will not be able to see me or hear me for a half an hour. I could be walking right in front of you, but you won't see or hear anything. It's like I don't even exist. Then he brings the guy out of hypnosis. Now, sure enough, the man comes out of trance, and the whole audience is laughing, but he can't see Baxter at all. Baxter's walking around, the guy doesn't see him at all. The craziest part was that Baxter actually picked up a cigarette, lit it, and started smoking and blowing smoke clouds into the air. All the guy saw was the cigarette levitating and smoke just pouring out of nothingness in the air. And he actually got really freaked out and wanted to run out of the room, and it was the audience calming him down that got him to stay. He had no idea that Baxter was there. But at exactly 30 minutes later, and people had timed this, all of a sudden he could see Baxter again like nothing was wrong. Now this guy's in a waking state of consciousness. He didn't think anything was different. When you're under post-hypnotic suggestions, you don't realize that anything about your reality is different. So how do we know that we're not under some kind of post-hypnotic suggestion right now? Now, just to push the envelope even further, there's an amazing story in the Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot, which is a story that he personally witnessed, in which a hypnotist hypnotized the father of a young girl. And under hypnosis, he told the father that he would not be able to see his own daughter or hear her whatsoever. Now, when he comes out of hypnosis under this post-hypnotic suggestion, before he's taken out of hypnosis, the hypnotist puts the daughter right in front of her father. So literally her body is right in front of his face. He comes out of hypnosis and he's looking around the room and he cannot see her at all. He doesn't hear her giggling. Everybody else is really surprised by this. Then the hypnotist takes a pocket watch and actually pushes it into the small of her back. And he did it quickly enough that nobody in the room was able to see that it was a pocket watch. But then he said to the man who was under post-hypnotic suggestion, "Can you see what I have in my hand?" Now this man actually leaned forward and he's squinting. And sure enough, he was actually able to see that it was a pocket watch, and he was able to read the inscriptions on the pocket watch perfectly accurately, looking through the body of his daughter. Now again, bear in mind that while he was doing this, he appeared to be perfectly conscious. This part of us that's out there having out-of-body experiences, it's not like it only kicks on when you're hypnotized. This appears to be something that's going on all the time. We're just not normally aware of it. But this suggests that physical reality as we know it is much more plastic than we normally consider. Some people like to call it different frequencies or different vibrations. I know some scientists who really discourage the use of those terms, but one of the terms that we do use for this that seems to be more accurate is a density. That there could be different densities of the source field. The source field, of course, as I said, ultimately being consciousness and being the author of reality, being the author of physical matter, an intelligence that creates physical matter. So if you are given the right post-hypnotic suggestion, it appears that you can see right through physical matter. Physical matter exists at a certain density in which it appears to be solid to us, but there are other levels in which it is not solid, and under the right suggestion, it's no longer that much of an obstacle. So how do we see through that veil? If physical matter is only one frequency or one density, then what is the secret that's going to allow us to get through that veil? That's one of the big questions that I address in the source field investigations and at these weekend conferences, of which this is just the beginning of a huge adventure that we're going to be doing. I propose that we already do have an astral body that's floating around and living in the source field. So the question, do we have an astral body? Absolutely yes. There's so much evidence for that, and we're going to go through a lot of that over the course of the weekend. And I believe that that part of us that's out there floating around doesn't just send photons to the area we're looking at. Now remember, the Chinese said in their research that when the subject was accurately remote viewing the target, up to 15,000 photons burst into the room all at once. So it appears that we can send photons into a particular area that we're viewing with our mind. So why couldn't we take photons out of that area and bring them back to our mind as well? If we can send photons out, it should be a two-way circuit. I'm going to talk about that two-way circuit a little bit later. In other words, I'm saying you could actually be floating around in your astral body, seeing things with what appears to be your eyes, although the question of whether you even have eyes in the astral body or whether it's just an energy body is an interesting question. But let's say you're looking at something and that something is giving off photons and you capture it into your energy field and you can somehow send it back to your mind. This is exactly what I believe is happening. Before we go there, though, I want to talk a little bit about non-local mind. This is another very, very fascinating discussion. Because when you get into the idea of the source field, the idea that all physical matter, all space, all time, and in fact biological life is all part of a consciousness, then your mind would be the gateway. Your mind would be the access point for that infinite consciousness. This changes the whole idea of what thoughts would actually be. We're conditioned to think that thoughts occur in the mind as just something that emerges from the result of electrical activity in the brain. What if thoughts do not simply occur in the mind? What if thoughts are like satellite TV signals? Because as we're sitting in the room right now, we're being bombarded with satellite television, broadband internet movies, satellite radio, cell phone conversations. Up until recently, it would have been broadcast television, but now that's all gone into the digital spectrum. The point is, even radio waves from a radio station, there's all this electromagnetic information that's going on around us right now. And we totally accept that. But what we don't ask ourselves is, do thoughts work that way? Could the brain, could the mind somehow be able to tune into the source field, tune into these thoughts that are out there energetically, and actually pull them in and give us a direct access to what's going on in the source field? And do we share consciousness? Do we share a mind with others? Well, going all the way back to 1983, some very, very groundbreaking research was done by Drs. William Broad and Marilyn Schlitz. They were specifically investigating a branch of remote viewing called remote influencing. Now, in remote influencing, the idea is that you try to affect other people's thoughts with your own mind. And they were trying to look at it not in terms of any negative thing or voodoo thing, like, ooh, let's see if we can get somebody to do something bad or hurt themselves or hurt somebody else. They were actually trying to look for positive ways to use this. So, for example, they found out that if participants came in for this particular study who had a high degree of anxiety, and they put them in a room, and then they went into another room, and the person in there doesn't know that anything's going on. They measure the anxiety level of that person. And then at a random time, with nothing else different, they spontaneously start trying to influence that person to make them calm down and be less anxious. And sure enough, as they did that, the person's own anxiety scores remarkably increased. And in case there's a skeptic watching this on the internet, yes, they actually measured it with physiological indicators. Heart rate went down, respiratory rate went down, and galvanic skin response, which is the electrical activity on your skin, like on the lie detector test. All of those physiological signals actually changed just by them remote influencing this person somewhere else. It doesn't mean that they handed him a magazine and he reads the magazine and then he calms down. Because as I said, they left him in there for a while and they measured the anxiety score and it stayed at a certain level, and it wasn't until they did the remote influencing that the anxiety changed. Now the next study is even more fascinating because they gave people tests to see how well they could concentrate. And they found that through remote influencing, they could actually improve people's ability to concentrate. You literally can have someone else do the thinking for you. They join with your mind, and you become more effective at thinking. Now, somebody can say, okay, well, maybe we have an ability to calm people down, and maybe because you calm down, that made you think better. But it can't be that there's any real information other than this general calming effect that could be transmitted. And that's not true either. In science, there is a documented phenomenon called the multiples effect. Now, the phenomenon of multiples was cataloged as having occurred 148 times by 1922. Now, what is multiples? Multiples refers to different scientists who are isolated from each other, who are not reading about each other's work, independently coming up with exactly the same discoveries at almost exactly the same time. And I'm just going to give you a few examples. Calculus was discovered independently by more than one scientist at a time. The theory of evolution wasn't just Darwin. There was other scientists working on it at the same time. Decimal fractions. The discovery of the oxygen molecule. The discovery of color photography. The discovery of logarithms. The discovery of sunspots in the 1600s. The discovery of the law of conservation of energy. 6 different people simultaneously invented the thermometer, each of whom thinking that they discovered it themselves and that they deserve the credit for it. 9 different people independently discovered the telescope at the same time, and all wanted to be credited with the discovery. Multiple individuals invented a typewriter at the same time, and 5 different people invented the steamboat at the same time. So what I'm telling you is that as we're working on these problems, as our mind is trying to solve something, and we start to have new insights, it's as if those insights are actually creating an informational field, a code that goes into this global mind that we're all sharing, and other people can access that information directly. Now, in the book, I also cite a paper from Sperry Andrews, which is actually a proposal to talk about things like this on television. And he requested something like $711,000 to finance these television programs, and he hasn't been able to get the financing, which I find astonishing, because this information is so groundbreaking, it deserves to be seen and heard by everyone. In his proposal, he includes the fact that there are over 500 studies, scientifically controlled, proving that consciousness affects biological systems as well as electrical systems. Now, the overall likelihood that this could be some sort of chance, that there could be any other explanation for why this is working other than that we all share consciousness, that we're all psychic, is less than 1 chance in a trillion. That should get some attention. I mean, at this point, we have to surrender the skepticism. And again, in the book, I bury you with data. There are so many references. I'm only giving the slightest little hints of each thing because it just goes on and on and on. But I've given you some of the most interesting ones. Scientific multiples is a wonderful example. 148 different cases by 1922. But the shared mind effect that I find the most fascinating and the most important for everyone to know today would be what I call the meditation effect. The meditation effect was proposed and tested